All right, so let's get started with the basics. Now, first thing, you can see here the bottom right corner, you see it says select interpreter. If you click on it, it's going to ask which Python version do you want to run. Right now, we have created our basics environment. This is the Python environment I want to run in, and I will select that. There are multiple versions of Python that I have, so ignore that. I want to select this particularly where we have our basics environment. I'm going to select that, and you can see that is what you have in bottom right corner, basics env, which is the virtual environment that is selected. So any code that you run here will run with this basics env environment. Now, with Python as any other programming language, let me just make sure that um, no chats. All right, because sometimes I do not get a notification in case somebody types a chat, so I just wanted to cross verify. Right, moving ahead. Python, when we start with this, the first thing, as in any programming language that we start, is perform something simple, assign some variables, perform some simple basic operations. So yeah, let's start with that now. Um, I'm just going to add a few comments to always specify what this file is about. You can add a comment in a few different ways. You can add a comment to it hash, which typically goes as a one-line comment, like this program is about the basic operations you can do in Python. What if I want to write multiple lines? Then I have to keep writing hash followed by multiple comments. Or an easier way to do that is just use double quotes 3 times. And within this, you can write any amount of lines you want, and it's basically counted as a comment. It's just a line only for you and other developers to understand. But Python as a programming language is not going to do anything with it. And it's quite useful because whenever we develop large projects and we want to hand it over to another developer over time, or whenever we are developing large projects and we move to another project and get back to our current project, it will become complicated for us to learn, understand, and figure out why um, we wrote certain code. This is a common thing that happens, especially with me, because I work on 4 to 5 different Python projects. So any new code that I develop, if there's some specific function that I create, I generally add a line of comment indicating what is this function about, what is the input, what is the output, so that 2 months down the line, if let's say a client says I need some modification in this function and I get back to it, I don't have to go through whole function to understand it. And this comment should be enough for me to just realize and work around it. Just something for us to know. So you can write, let's say, multiple lines of comments any way you'd like, but let's not focus on that. Let's go ahead and start with the code. Now, in Python, as in any other programming language, as in any programming language, any value we assign to any variable has to be right to left by default. That basically means that if you have a variable you have a variable, basic variable is basically a name which can have any value. It's just a container that can store any value within it, and the value can change. Right now, a has the value of 5. Next, it can have the value of 6. Um, and unlike other programming languages, Python does not limit you only to numbers. After 5 and 6, you can even write, let's say, a string within it, like hello as well. You can literally perform all these operations with a single variable. It does not limit you with this, and it does not say, hey, this is an error. You cannot change the data type of a variable from an integer to a string. You can literally do all these things. So yeah, the basic idea here is that whatever is on the right hand side is computed and stored in the left hand side, just like any other programming language. That's something we just need to know, regardless of programming languages. So let's start with this. So the first thing I want to point out as the different data types we have in Python. So we understand what they are, how we use it, where we use it, and what are the additional functionalities or advantages they offer specifically. So let's take a look at this to begin with. Right. Again, I'm just going to wait for a few seconds if there are any queries at all so far. If none, we'll just move ahead. All right. So no queries ahead. All right. So we can uh, move ahead in that case and continue from where we left off. All right. So going on, the first thing that we want to know to begin with here is the kind of data types that we might have in short. So there are a lot of different data types that are available in Python, and you can perform specific operations on those data types alone. So to do that, I'll take first a equals 5, which is a simple integer number. I'm just going to print type of a. And yeah, since we're starting our first program or first application, there are two ways you can print anything. You can print something, some variable like this, and you can separate it with a comma and print something else. Like, for example, let's print type of a is a comma and then type of a. So the moment you run this, let's um, go ahead to the terminal. Think, yeah, there we go. To run any application, you just start with Python followed by the file name. So I just have Python followed by the file name 01 underscore intro dot py. Once I run it, it gives me the output saying type of A is comma type of A, which is a class integer. So in other words, since you have stored 5 belongs to a specific class called int, which is identified with lowercase characters int. This is quite important because it's something that we will use ahead in time. Um, so we need to know what is the type of each, let's say, data type or type of each variable rather. Instead of having to print with comma operator like this, there are other ways to print. Now, just one thing that we need to know here is a comma operator by default adds a space between each thing that you're printing. So for reference, I can just write type comma of comma, let's say a, and then comma is. Now, once I do this, you can just take a look at it here in a way where we can. Okay, let me just execute it so that I can show this to you. This should prove it better. You can see after type, we have of. Since we have them separated by comma, that will by default give you a space here. Just something that we need to know. So you can specify a string, you can specify an integer, you can specify all kinds of data types with the comma and it will separate them. Another way that you can use this to avoid all of these is something that I personally prefer to use is to use a formatted string. A formatted string is f with double quotes. In f with double quotes, you can write type of a is, and if you want to write a variable within it, you can just use curly braces and write this. For example, I'll just write value of a is a. Now there are two ways for us to do this, as you can observe. I can just write print value of a is, and I can use comma and then type a. Or I can just use a formatted string, write value of a is. And since it's a formatted string, any variable you want to write, you can just use curly braces and write the variable name in it. So if you run this, you'll get the same output in both cases, except one is with formatted strings. The other is with regular strings. Now, with this understood, let's move on from here. The next point of this, you can observe here that from the first print statement to the next print statement, it automatically goes to the next line. And this is something that we need to know and understand quite well because we might need to modify our application the way we want. We might need to modify, let's say, our own application or our own output formats the way we want at any point of time. That's something we might need to do constantly. So let's take a look at how exactly this happens. Now, first things first, print is an inbuilt function. The moment you hover your mouse on print, you'll see all the things that print offers and it doesn't offer. And I'm just going to copy this because this is going to be quite important for us to learn and figure out what exactly it is. I'm just going to hold it on. I'm just going to copy this. Should be fine enough. And I'm just going to paste it here for a reference. All right, that's two. Yeah, that should be fine. All right, so here's what it states. This is the format or syntax of the print function. And there's a reason why I'm going deep into this because we're going to use similar things ahead in time. We're going to use something very similar ahead for a lot of functions. Any function that you want to learn or anywhere you feel you're going wrong in your code, you can just take a look at this and understand where you're going wrong, or you can just take a look at this and understand why your code might not be working as expected purely through this. So that's one thing that we're going to use a lot, which is why I wanted to give a little specific focus on this. Now, moving ahead. Let's go on to the next part of this. Now, to the first point as we were making, to the first point as we were making, print is an inbuilt function and it can take various different parameters. You can see the first parameter is the object that you want to print. And you can see star here. Star means that you can provide multiple values. So let's just remember that star means you can provide multiple values to print. This means that I can use print and in bracket, I can provide multiple values like this, then is, then a, something like this. You can provide multiple values to print. Star indicates that, and you can provide any object. It specifically says that you can provide any object for yourself to print. So we're just printing this is a on the screen. Once done, once this is printed on the screen, the next thing here is you have other parameters. Now you can see all the other parameters have specific data type. Separator must be a string, end must be a string, file must be a string, flush must be a literal, which is false preferably. And you see that there is a default value. Whenever you see something like this equals, that means there is a default value and you don't have to compulsorily specify separator. What separator means is whenever you perform any print statement, let's say hi, comma, let's say a. This by default means that between hi and a, since you have used a comma, since they are separated by the comma, this separator indicates that it will be separated by a space by default. And end indicates that by default, once you complete printing this, once you're done with this print statement, the end should be /n. /n is basically a new line character. So it should, once this print statement is done, it should basically go to the next line and print ahead. And that is why you get to see here, whenever I use a comma, the separation operator, you see it creates a space by default. And whenever we go from one print statement to next print statement, the default end is to go to the next line. Hence, you go to the next line. But you can change it just for our reference. Here, instead of end being default as /n, I will make it end as /n, /n, /n. So instead of one line, I'm moving 3 lines away and I'm printing it. So this is the change I am trying to do. So we can see how exactly this works. For instance, we can see how this kind of makes a difference in our case, particularly because we can use this for many purposes, right? We can use this for many different ways on how we need to perform, let's say, a print operation, how we need to perform, let's say, um, a separator operation, and so on. There are a lot of different ways you can work around them. And the reason why we are going in depth within this is because we're going to see a lot of different functions over time. And I need you to be able to look at this, just hover over the function, look at what parameters it has, and understand what it means. It'll also give you the meaning of what each of these things mean. For example, here, it tells you what separator means. It's a string inserted between values. Default is a space. Similarly, what end means. It's a string appended at the end of the last value, and so on. So we get all these information that helps us identify and perform these operations in short. Now, with this understood, with this idea known, let's now move ahead. Let me just erase this out. There we go. The remaining thing I'm not gonna worry about right now. This is to make sure that you're printing on the output screen and not to a file. If you want to print it to some other file, you can do that, and flush is to clear off the output if you want. We don't necessarily need to work around these for now. We can ignore that. And the last and quite important part of this is arrow mark followed by none. This means what is print statement returning? What does it return once it has executed? In our case, we get to know once it has executed, it returns nothing. So since it returns nothing, you have no reason to, let's say, store result equals print of something, because print is going to return none. So result will always be none. So there's no point in storing that. So that's another thing that it says. Yeah, that's just some basic thing I wanted to point out. That's just a basic idea I wanted to walk through and clear it out, so we have a better understanding at our end as to um, what exactly happens here, and how exactly does this work. Now, with this idea clear, we can now move ahead to the next case. So prior to that, if there are any queries so far, till now, please feel free to let me know. I will answer your queries and then move ahead. All right. So yeah, no queries in that case. All right. Um, so moving ahead from here, let's go on to the next part. I'm just gonna erase this out. And yeah, I will keep using this whiteboard or blackboard, whatever you might want to call it. If you feel any color is not visible or so on, so please just let me know whenever that such a scenario happens. All right. Also, hey Matthew, thanks for joining in. Also, if Matthew is a participant as well within this, just to give a brief info, I think the others are have heard this quite a lot, but just to give you a brief info, um, because of the diversity in the participants we have in terms of understanding of Python so far, I'm just going from scratch. So if you have any queries or if you have any questions that you would like me to answer throughout, you can feel free to let me know. Just unmute and feel free to speak out so that if you have any queries, I can address them and I can answer them to you. So yeah,
Oh, okay,
all
sounds
right,
good. Thank you very much.
right. Thanks a lot. So yeah, and this is the most important thing that we need to know was learn how to understand these functions, the parameters within these functions, and what are the return values they provide. So we can actually get to know what they do. And if they don't do something that we expect it to do, how do we modify certain values and so on? That's one thing. And for beginners in Python, for us who are learning Python from scratch, there's a specific library or a package that I would highly prefer to use. I don't use it anymore, but if you're learning Python from scratch, I would highly prefer you to give it a check. It's called ice cream. Not this ice cream. Let's go for Python. This should be fine. There we go. So we have this particular package called ice cream or particular library called ice cream that you use. It basically says never use print to debug again. It's just a replacement of print statement to make it slightly easier for you if you want to work around it. Again, it's not something that's a game changer in any way whatsoever. It's just something that helps you work around printing easier. Generally what we end up doing is whenever we want to print something like the value of a is a or something like a is a or something like this, instead of this, to avoid printing this, you can use ice cream instead. Again, I'm just going to install it here. Let's just use pip install ice cream. Again, this is not a compulsory thing for us to use whatsoever. It's just something that you can use if you're a beginner and you want to look at each line, and if you just want to print a variable and understand it better. That's pretty much all. So I've just installed ice cream by using pip install ice cream. Now here, you can just write import ice cream as IC. Again, we generally use these alias keywords to import something because this helps us write our programs faster. It's going to be a pain to write ice cream entirely each time, right? 8 characters. It's not going to be the most pleasant thing to constantly type it. So what you can often do is just import it with, let's say, an alias name. So we're going to import ice cream. And whenever I want to use this ice cream module, instead of writing ice cream, I'm just going to use IC. That's all I'm going to do. So here I'm just going to write IC and let's take a look at this. I believe this is all that it is, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, import ice cream and just print. Yeah, we are right. So just use IC and print A. Now here's the difference. I'm not writing A is A or anything. I'm just printing the value or just a variable. Now, once you run your program, let's see this. Oh, I am so sorry. This is supposed to be from ice cream. Import IC. Ice cream has a function called IC. Yeah. So just to give us a brief description. Right. So okay, there we go. I can import um, ice cream. Let's say as IC. This will import this entire module name that we have in short as IC. But that is not what I want to do with ice cream. Apparently, ice cream as a module has an inbuilt function called IC, which we need to import. So from ice cream as a module, I'm just going to import that is within this module, I'm going to import a specific function called IC. If you're not too sure about where we need to use import and where we need to use from and import, don't worry. We're going to create our own package locally, and that'll help us understand where to use from and where to use import. This is going to be a constant theme when we develop applications. So we'll have a better idea about it in future. So within ice cream, we have a function called IC, which we're going to import. That's pretty much it. Now it should work as expected. There we go. It's going to print within IC a colon 5. So all that it's doing here is it's stating that though you're just printing the value of the variable, it's going to specify the variable a has a value 5. This will help you understand better if you're debugging and you don't have to type too much. So you can just type the variable names and you can um, easily and quickly debug a lot of things directly. That's one big advantage when we talk about this. Anyway, let's move ahead from here to the next part of this. Now that we are aware, now let's go on to our variables. So we've just taken a look at print function. What is separator within print function is a comma by default, and we have learned that end is /n by default, and you can change them in any way you want. We've learned all of this. Now let's move on to the next thing, that is data types. So to understand this, it's quite important for us to know which are the data types that are available within Python and how to play around them, how to convert them, how to use them, and what are the functions we have specifically for them, because that'll help us use them better. So let's start with this. I'm just going to start with a equals 5. And again, you can use IC to make it a smaller program, but I'm used to printing formatted strings um, because when it comes down to longer contextual information, if I want to print something specific, formatted strings is quite easy to implement and work. So I'm just going to use this for our understanding. So let's start with this. So I'm just going to write, let's say, a type of A is type of A. A type is an inbuilt function. This inbuilt function is going to return what is the data type of that particular variable you're placing within it. So whatever is the data type of this, we're going to get to know. And I'm also going to write type of A in a variable as well. So it'll specifically print type of value of A, which is 5, is whatever is the data type of it. I'm just going to copy this and place it a few more times. Yeah, they should be fine. So the first one will be an integer, then I'm going to take a float value, then I'm going to take a character, then I'm going to take multiple characters with single quotations, double quotations, this, and yeah, this should be fine. Okay, might need to take a few more examples. And all right, let's see what else do we have. False. And we have, most importantly, none. I think this should be fairly good enough. It should cover most of the things that we're going to learn. Right, so this is what I want to focus on. When you run this, all I have done here is just print the value of different variables. That's pretty much all that we have done. To understand this better, let's just take a look at this. Again, just to recap, this is all that we're doing. In short, we just have some variable. We have stored a value in it. We're just printing that value, and we're also printing what is the type of that value. Now, first thing here is 5. 5 is purely an integer. So it belongs to class int. Any value, either negative, 0, or positive, as long as it does not have any decimal point like 3.14 or so on, it belongs to integer category. And whenever it has a decimal point, it belongs to float category. This is just two different data types we have for numbers. We can have int for numbers or float for numbers for our reference. And then the next is string. You can see there are 4 different times we have printed string. And I just wanted to differentiate between them because the first one, I used a single quotation for a single character. Then I use single quotation for multiple characters. Then I use double quotations for single character and double quotations for multiple character. In all four of these cases, the data type is the same. That's because Python does not have a separate data type called character, unlike other programming languages that could be C or C++ or Java. Python pretty much takes whether you write it with single quotations or double quotations, whether it's a single character or multiple characters. All of them belong to a single data type that is specifically called str or string in short. That's just something we need to know because we don't have a separate data type called a character for our reference within Python. Right, moving ahead from this. The next data type that we have is complex, which we rarely use in real world, but I will use it for a specific example in day 2 or 3 possibly. That is complex variable. It's just in the form of x plus y j, where x and y are numbers and j indicates that it's the irrational part of the number for a complex number. Again, not a common thing that we use, but just so you know, this is another inbuilt data type that we have. And we have Boolean variables called false and true. And you can observe false begins with an uppercase F. There are only three specific values or three specific inbuilt keywords that begin with uppercase. Most of inbuilt keywords functions, everything begin with lowercase. You saw print begins with lowercase. Type is a function begins with lowercase. All classes begin with lowercase. All variables views, values views begin with lowercase, except for three specific things. That is false, true, and none. These are the three things that specifically begin with uppercase. This is an exceptional thing when we talk about Python particularly. Now, moving ahead from this, now that we know and understand these begin with uppercase, purely because these are what we call as special constants. Their values never change. False is always false, true is always true, none is always none, which is why they begin with uppercase. Now, anyway, let's move away from this. This is the basic idea of the different data types we have: int, float, string, complex, boolean, and name type. Now that we know this, we can then move ahead to start working on them and start performing some basic operations on these data types and values. Right. So far, if there are any queries still here, please feel free to let me know if you have any queries that you would like to ask. Also, simultaneously, if you're executing these and if you want me to stay on the screen for longer here, you can let me know about that as well. I'll be able to do these as well, just for our reference. All right. So I presume there are no specific queries so far. That's pretty awesome. Right, let's move ahead in that case. Right. Now that we know about data types and variables so far, let's start with the next one. Now, the next thing we get to generally work around with these data types is to understand how Python works internally. Again, I'm going through a lot of things about how Python works internally because a lot of times we make mistakes about how Python works internally. We don't understand it and we just create a program which ends up being something else than we expect, which ends up giving a different output than we expect. Now, for our understanding, I'm just going to walk through this simple inbuilt function called uh, ID within Python. ID within Python is going to return identity of an object. As we know, identity is unique, right? Each one of us have a unique identity. So the same thing is what it does. This is guaranteed to be unique among simultaneously existing objects. If there are many objects existing, this is guaranteed to be unique. This is what it says. Let's keep this in mind. So it says C Python uses the object's memory address. So wherever it is stored in the RAM, whatever is the address that is stored in the RAM, that's specifically what it takes to identify the identity of the object. Now I'm just going to write A as 5, and I'm going to create another variable B as 5 or B as 6, and I'm just going to print, for example, ID of, okay, rather than this, let me just make it slightly different. Um, okay, okay, let me not go over to complex functions. So let me just print these instead to begin with. Let's print ID of A is ID of A, and I'm gonna print another function, another statement. ID of B is ID of B. Done. Now, once you run this, you get to see ID of A ends with 928, ID of B ends with 960. It's pretty simple and straightforward for us to understand that each variable will be stored in a separate memory address. Each variable is going to have its unique address. Now I'm just going to write B equals B minus 1. B is initially 6. B minus 1, right hand side is going to be 6 minus 1, which is 5. And that is what we are storing in B. So once you store 5 in B, now that you run this again, you get to see they're still different. A is in 928, B is in 960. However, I'll just make one small change. I'm going to make A have a variable, A as a variable have value 5. B as a variable will also have value 5. And when I run this, they are never supposed to be the same because Python says it is guaranteed to be unique among simultaneously existing objects. However, we get the same value here. This is something a lot of Python developers who know Python well often don't know about the workings of the architecture of Python, because how can two variables have the same ID? How can two variables be in the same location? This is something we'll see ahead. But prior to that, I just want to ask one question to all of you. Generally, within the previous sessions when I conducted with your organization, I used to take a break right after 2 hours since the start of the session. So we started by 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, and now it's 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. Would you all prefer to have a small break now and then get back after that? Would that be feasible for everyone?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. So yeah, would you prefer to have, let's say, a 15-minute break or a 20-minute break, depending on the requirements? You can just let me know. We'll take a break accordingly. Right. Eric, that's totally all right. All right. So 15 minutes is fine. So let's just join back by 10:45 a.m. Eastern time. I know we're leaving a couple of minutes late, so we can join back by a couple of minutes later as well. That should be fine. So yeah, we'll do that. So please have a good break and we'll join back by then. Thank you. Also, I hope the pacing of the session so far has been all right. I know that we are starting now, so it might not be perfectly fine for us to sync up directly, but I hope the pacing is fine and the content, the way of delivery is fine with everyone. So if you'd like it to be modified in any way, feel free to interact. You don't have to worry. All right. Yeah. Thanks again. So please go ahead with the break. We'll connect back.